Howdy. First, quick look around. This is the small but mighty group of people that thinks that governed workflows are more interesting than lunch. I'm not sure what that says about all of us, but thank you for being here. I'm also feeling a little vulnerable as I start this presentation today. It's my first time giving a talk at Coalesce. I've spoken at Snowflake Summits before, I've spoken at reInvents before, and every time I've done that, I've felt confident that my material was going to be interesting because it was based on hardened platforms that I'd built previously and could state the value of. We're going to see about this one. I don't know. I've built something like this before, but I haven't done it in the context of DBT, and I don't know how it's going to land with this audience. So thank you for participating in a live discovery session. Your feedback on how this goes is actually going to shape how much or how little we spend in these areas, so I appreciate it. Who am I? I'm Patrick. I am a director of product here at DBT Labs. I've been here for just about 10 months. I've been in my current role for just about 3. And I'm the PM lead for our application layer. And so, when you think about the UI, you think of things like Studio, you think of Canvas, Catalog, Insights, our new cost management experiences. And so those are the teams that I oversee. Prior to DBT, I spent about 8 years at Capital One. And there I did a variety of things. I was a PM lead for our cloud migration, so moving from on-premise Teradata and Hadoop to Kafka, Snowflake, S3, Databricks. I built out our internal catalog, I built out our data quality experiences, I built out our access experiences, and then I also built out something called user spaces for analysts, which is where I'm loosely taking some of this inspiration. I was also a PM lead for something called Capital One Slingshot, which is a cost optimization tool for Snowflake and Databricks. So if you hate this, come talk to me afterwards about cost optimization, and I'll talk about it for days. All right. So just before I get in, I want to get a sense of who I'm talking to here real quick. Who here is an IC data practitioner at your company? All right, right on. Who here is a manager of a team? Excellent. And who here signs checks, manages multiple platforms, manages multiple teams? All right, a couple of you. Awesome. And then last question, how many of you come from finance, healthcare, or some other kind of company where regulation and data governance and data security is super important? All right, that's why you're here. Excellent. Great. So I'm going to run you through 3 things. One is kind of the problem statement and why we need new solutions for self-service. As I was giving this presentation to someone on our product marketing team, he said, this is kind of like a cookbook. And I said, that's a cool phrase. So I adopted that, and I'm going to talk about a cookbook for how you can piece together your data warehouse, DBT, and Git to promote governed collaboration. And then hopefully I'll leave you with something interesting. So earlier this year, section 1, problem. Earlier this year, we released a set of new functionality for less technical data practitioners. We expanded Catalog to support search and discovery of non-DBT assets for Snowflake. We released Insights, which is a querying experience for users to run, save, and share analyses. We've just GA'd Insights, and for anyone that's using the semantic layer, we've enhanced it to make it much easier to query metrics that you've configured there. And we also released Canvas, our AI-powered low-code, no-code drag-and-drop tool for less technical practitioners to build data transformations. Now, why did we do this? We've had customers telling us for a while now that we love what you do for our more technical group, but we have all of these people over here that we'd love to bring into DBT. We're spending all of this time and effort curating these high-quality data assets through DBT, and then this other group of people comes in, and they turn it into this disaster web of mess. It's completely ungoverned data. Opens us up to risk, these ungoverned tools. And so we said, OK, we're going to start trying to bring these people in. But as we were shopping around this functionality to you all, we got a lot of positive feedback. But we also heard again and again this sentiment of, we can't let those people into DBT. We can't let them in. It would be like giving a baby a flamethrower. Now, I promise this is the only AI slop that you're going to find in this presentation today. But this is what we heard. Our analysts don't know how to write good SQL. Our analysts don't know Git. They're going to rebuild the same metric again and again and again and again. Like, we can't let them in. OK, sure, but they're struggling. We recently put out a survey where we surveyed 500+ people with analysts in their job title, just about the state of their work and how things were going. You can Google it. You can find it up there. I think everyone knows that analysts spend too much time on busy work. We actually are busy work like data wrangling, and we actually put a cost associated with that. But for my money, the most interesting stat in here is this thing in the bottom right. 97% of people that we surveyed said they wanted governance in their self-service tools. And when you start to dig and scratch at that a little bit, there's this sentiment of, I want to do the right thing. I just don't know how, or it's too hard. And so they're struggling. And as their data leaders are struggling too. They've got CFOs telling them, be more efficient, do more with less. They've got CTOs telling them, be more well-governed. We're highly regulated. Get better control of this environment. And then you've got your lines of business telling you, go faster, more AI everywhere. I want this data. I want it now. And so data teams are kind of stuck in the middle. And what are you supposed to do? So now we're going to talk about how to design an environment where everybody wins. The concept is kind of like a data sandbox. Companies have different names for these things. I've heard data enablement zones, data zones, user sandboxes, user spaces. It's a dedicated space in your warehouse for users to explore, test, and build models. It's a playground for experimentation, but it's connected to production data and connected to production processes. How many of you employ something like this at your companies today? And how many of you use dbt to do it? All right, not bad, not bad. Here is the concept. So you create 3 separate spaces within your warehouse, and each space has a different set of governance policies applied. What we're taking advantage of here is the fact that not all data is created equal, and not all data needs the same level of governance. Temporary tables, scratch work, it doesn't need the same type of policies applied that regulatory reporting or customer PII data does. And so you create these 3 spaces where the governance applied is sloped based on the risk of that data. Your data warehouse is where the data lives. dbt is the mechanism through which your users interact with that data. And then you use Git to control the quality of the data and the quality of the code as it moves between these spaces. All right, so now I'm going to get to this cookbook and talk about how you can configure each one of these layers to promote governed collaboration. First, we're going to talk about your data warehouse. And specifically, we'll start with the user space. The purpose of the user space is for temporary, exploratory, work-in-progress artifacts. This is not meant for long-term persistence. If your company is complex, if it has multiple lines of business, you might want to create a single user spaces database for each domain. Or if your company has fewer lines of business, you could create one database for the entire company. But the key is giving each user their own personal schema, because you don't want to slow them down as they create new assets within your warehouse. For roles and access, so you want your users to have access to whatever prod data they're entitled to, but in this environment, their roles should only be allowed to write into their personal user schema, nowhere else. You probably want to apply some kind of cost controls in this environment. You could use resource monitors, you could use budgets. If you really wanted to get strict, you could use per user or per team limits. And then in terms of process and governance, you don't want to allow scheduling jobs in this space. You probably don't want to enable connections to BI tools in this space, because these data assets are meant to be temporary, not permanent. You don't want to turn this thing into a swamp that people depend on, because you're not putting a ton of governance there. But you should be more strict about data retention policies. If people are storing data for long periods of time, it could end up costing you more than you expect. And if there's sensitive data where you don't know that it exists, it could open you up to risk. And so you might want to put in place some kind of process that scans the environment every 30 days or so and says, if you don't move this thing, it's going to get deleted. Now, where would they move it to? They could move it to the shared collaboration space. And this space is for teams to collaborate on models. Let's say you're a fraud department and you're creating a list of known fraudsters that you want to share with all of your different business units. You could create a new schema for those teams to collaborate in. And then if you wanted to add some additional governance there, so where it says domain sandbox, it could say domain underscore sandbox underscore PII. And that's the only place where PII data is allowed to be collaborated on, and you need a special role to get there. You want to make sure that users that are assigned to these roles, they have the right access into this environment. They should still be able to talk to production data. You probably want to put in place stricter masking and row access policies here, and you want everything to be classified. Because at this point, you're saying this data can persist for a little bit longer. It's used by more teams. It's connected to downstream processors or BI reports. And so we have to know a little bit about what's going on with this data. And then finally, since this space is more of an interim zone between my personal user space and production, you probably want to allow job scheduling and BI tool integration so that teams that are working together can confirm that the assets being produced actually match their expectations across different business units. Okay, production data. You have two primary options here for where this data lives. I've seen them both. One is you let users write data into your true production environment. A lot of people are like, I would never do that in a million years. And so one of the things that you can do is create a user production environment. And if you're good about your naming convention, if you're good about your cataloging, when users discover this user prod data, because it's named a certain way or lives in a certain place, they understand that even though it's quote production, it's different than true production that maybe your data engineering teams create. So at this point, every model that's built should be using a system role. It shouldn't be an individual's role. You want to enable inheritance should an individual contributor leave the company, and you want to have ownership over that process if it breaks. And then at that point, you treat it like any other production data. So you set up alerts for failed jobs and tasks. You can integrate with Slack, PagerDuty, whatever. You can ship any of those logs to Splunk or Datadog if that's what you use. Yeah, that's about it. So DBT projects, or how to set up the DBT platform. In the personal user space, you could have a single playground project per team or per domain where users can freely create feature branches. You could put testing requirements in here, but you probably don't want to. You want to make it very light or non-existent. And contracts should be completely optional. You probably just want to keep track of who owns the data in this environment. When you move into the shared space, now you want to add some structure to your DBT project folders. So tests become required for any MART data. You probably want to put in place contracts for any MART data because this data could be powering downstream BI reports. Every model needs, not optional at this point, a clear human owner. And every downstream dashboard or downstream use case, you could have that defined as an exposure within DBT. The goal here is you don't want to create a ton of friction, but you do want to create a ton of visibility. And then on the production side, you want your production environment clearly separated. You could have a dedicated project or a distinct deployment target. You could use selectors to control exactly what can get built in production so you don't have any leakage from the dev or sandbox areas. And then you want to add quality gates to make sure that your data is updated, it's fresh, it's validated, it's auditable, there's tests. And then you might want to enforce change management and versioning at this point, because if people are depending on this data, you don't want users to inadvertently break downstream processes. Git is the last ingredient here, and we use Git to manage how data and code moves between these different spaces. And so within the user space, employ free branching. with non-blocking status checks. Just like let people add whatever data they want to this space. Then, when they're ready to promote it, have them run PRs with light tests, but auto-merge into the collaboration space. Again, the idea is visibility everywhere, but not a ton of friction in this at this time. Once data gets to the collaboration space, you probably want PRs to require at least one approver, and you might want to have tests actually block new merges. And then when you move from collaboration into prod, you want to make sure that all of the tests and contracts have passed, the necessary reviewers and approvers have signed off, confirm that the models have built successfully in the production staging environment, and then you do the merge. So that's the cookbook. Data warehouse, Git, dbt. You link them together. You can build some workflows that let your users create new work products in their user space, move them into a shared collaboration space, then move them into production, all within this shared controlled environment. No, wrong button. I ripped through that pretty quick, more quicker than I thought. The three things that I hope that you took away from this, one is the key to enabling governed self-service at scale is baking governance into user workflows. You know, your users want to do the right thing. They want to be good corporate stewards. They just don't often understand how or what they're supposed to do. The second thing is not all data needs to be governed the same way. This three-space model balances enablement and governance, which those two things are always kind of pulling at each other in tension. You know, you'll over-index on governance, and then your business units complain, and then you over-index on speed, and your risk departments complain. And so what we're really trying to do here is thread the needle between those two needs. And you already have the tools you need. You know, between your data warehouse, between dbt, between Git, like it forms the backbone of a governed self-service analytics environment. It just takes a little setup. And so, depending on how this landed with you, if this is something that you'd be interested in partnering with us on as we figure out if there's a there, hit me up. This is me. I'm very interested in this. And if you are interested in the report that we published on the state of analysts and their work, that's there. All right, now I have way more time than I expected for questions. Thank you.
So quick question for you. I really appreciate the way you showed like the user in the call-up space, and I totally agree with you how to build it. But from my perspective, what I would think is that once you go into production, because these business users are trying to expedite your delivery, right? So they know SQL, they know dbt, they want to push it out. But from my perspective, what I was thinking is that once you push it into production, rather than giving them their own siloed space, wouldn't we incorporate it into our fact tables, into our dimensions, whatever it is? So that way now it's the engineers that are taking that last step, which is making sure that the code is good, making sure they can support it. Because I have 4 developers and about 20 SQL gurus, if you want to call them, in the business space that will create a mess, and then they're going to expect my 4 people, rather than developing, maintaining the mess that they created.
You could probably, so the cool thing about these 3 pillars, these 3 tools, is all of the settings are configurable. And so you can tweak the workflows to suit your specific needs. In that example, maybe you let your business users submit pull requests, but they can't actually merge anything in. Like that has to be done by somebody on the engineering team that can actually review the code. And that gives, it lets you empower your teams your business teams to do the work, but you kind of keep that gate in place. And so you could have it merge into your true production project, or you could make it be a separate project, but it sounds like you would want to just merge it into your true prod project. And so you would have to put the governance there at the approval level in Git.
what the code into the base as, you know, project, a real project versus having to use a project.
Yeah.
Two questions. So, one quick clarifying question. It sounds like you're recommending an alternative pattern for a project that is just for analysts, kind of like in a DBT mesh of projects, an analyst-centric project, or is this thinking of like an alternative flow within a single project where you have your data engineers and data analysts?
So you could do it as a separate project. And if it was me, that's probably what I would do. Because I would want to create a pretty clear delineation between true production data that the engineering team has gone and built and signed off on, and data that's really important for certain business use cases, but isn't up to the same standard as that engineering data. And so I would probably do it that way. But if you wanted to keep things cleaner and just have one project, then you would just have to build in different approval steps in the Git workflows.
And then second question, it kind of sounds like you might want two different DBT project evaluator, like configuration profiles for the different stages as you're merging into that collaboration space and then into that production space. Any thoughts on what that might look like?
No, but I'll talk to you afterwards.
I think it might just be turning off. Yeah, turn it back on.
Hello? Okay, there we go. Apologies. I had a quick question. Could you elaborate a little bit more about the difference and how you see the difference between the collaboration and prod space? Because from experience, people, if you give them something they can collaborate on and everybody has access to, they're just going to keep using that space as production.
So what I've done in the past is put gates around the types of processes that can consume from the collaboration environment. And so like no system accounts or no applications can consume from there, but BI reports are fair game. And so I would just try to decide like what you want to use the space for, what it's not for, and then you build the right checks in there. You don't have to run, Aaron. No one's gonna make you run.
I know.
Howdy. So you say, hey, they don't know how to do it, so give them light tests. So you go into the collaboration layer. Who is doing the work then in the collaboration and production that brings it up to governance if the analysts don't know how?
Who's doing that? Ask it again.
Who's doing the work that's actually bringing the extra governance that the analysts don't know how?
You would need to build that somewhere into your system. And so if it's Snowflake, for example, and let's say you wanted to enforce that every new table in this environment had an owner associated with it.
Sure.
You just have to create some job that runs and says, is there a tag associated with this table where the owner field is filled out? And if not, you have some process that pings the user or pings the ID of the user that created it and says you have to go in and add this field.
Yeah, so if the analyst that doesn't know how to is the person that's updating it anyway, why not just push it left and be like, yeah, you have to do this and just have the checks be there?
You could do that if that makes sense for you. I mean, it's like I said before, the cool thing is it's like you get to define the workflows that are going to make sense for your company and the policies that will make sense for your company. Like Capital One, where I was, is going to be different than an insurance company. It's going to be different than like a drug research company. And so I'm sure if you work for one of these companies, you have some data governance group that says, here are the policies you have to apply. And so this just gives you a mechanism to apply those things within an environment that your users are working.
But the analysts are ultimately the people that have to finally have the pull request into prod.
They at least have to submit it.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
Hi. I love the presentation. I think the part that I struggle with, and I've tried to communicate the same thing, is that there are different teams. I'm within finance, and so we have engineers within finance, but we're not part of IT. And so the struggle really is trying to talk with people who think you need a CS degree to do this work. Been doing this work for 20 some years. That's not what you need. So I think part of it is influence, right? But this whole idea where you can be flexible, you can set those things up, you can do the testing you're talking about, and you can shift it left. And we really need to get into what are the foundational aspects of what you're building off of. How can we allow people to do things like, within finance, you have certain go-to-markets, like marketing, like RevOps, different from controllership. They work on things that have 100-year-old rules, right? They rarely change. But if someone's quota's got to change, I might have to do some actions, and I need to do it like this. And so that flexibility needs to be theirs. But I think the how you can do it is great, but I think there needs to be like, how can we influence this to actually come about? Especially if you're not in a very small business where everyone's on DBT and you're just trying to get a foothold. Thanks.
Can you say something like, you know how I piss you off at least twice a week when I come to you with a new request? Would you really like me to stop doing that? I'll give you all the same visibility that you already have. Just, give me my own space over here. Thanks.
Hello. I work at kind of a small company, and we don't have like this collaborative space. So I'm wondering why the user took collaborative to production. Why is that collaborative space needed? Why can't we kind of just like merge that with a user space?
Totally. It might not be needed for smaller companies. I have seen it be very successful when you have one department collaborating on data with another department. You've got one centralized marketing function that serves multiple business units, retail banking, commercial banking, and they need to create work products that different departments can use. And so having that collaboration space it's not quite production because when you work in a highly regulated company, production data means something. It's very, very strict. You kind of need something between my personal scratch pad and like the really, really important data. And so that's where the collaboration space comes in. But you may not need it depending on your company.
Yeah, because I guess like when I push to Git, I feel like that's like the collaboration space. I just like make something on dev, push it, and then it gets approved, and I'm merged to prod. I'm just not like, is that not the same thing, or am I missing something here?
I've seen enough examples where teams need a place that is not my personal space, but doesn't require me to go through the full engineering lifecycle or the full engineering process of moving something into production, because that typically requires a ton of red tape, especially at bigger companies. And so having just a separate place in your data warehouse for these assets to live that you can move things in and out and collaborate with other people within your organization, but not go through that process has been useful. I mean, it might not be for you, but it might be for others.
Okay, thank you.
All right, thank you all.